it's Monica with It's Just Sewing, and today I want to talk to you about something that really frustrates people who sew, whether they've been sewing for a few weeks or 20 years, and that's thread tension. So thread tension can seem really complicated and frustrating, so I'm going to break it down for you in a way that's going to just make it simpler and make it more digestible to start off with, especially if you are new to sewing. So the first thing I want to show you is where your thread tension dial is located. I'm sure you all know, but it's right, for like a newer machine, it's going to be right up here, okay? And it usually goes all the way from a 0 down to a 0 and up to a 9. You'll notice as you're starting to get higher up with newer machines that it starts getting tighter, so keep that in mind, okay? So we're going to go ahead and set it right at the middle at about a 4.5. If you have an old vintage machine, typically what you'll see is the thread tension dial is going to be front and center and kind of out for display, so it's not tucked into the machine, so it's kind of a knob that sits right out front. All right, so how to identify an issue with thread tension. Normally when you start sewing and you look at your stitch line, you are going to see your stitch line. Here's your stitches, they look beautiful, okay? And you're like, oh, I love it. And you turn it on the back side, looks the same. Ooh, beautiful. All right, so that's not always the case, unfortunately. And sometimes what you will see is you will see one side look kind of loose or loopy and the other side be really tight, or when you're sewing and you're running your fabric through, you'll notice that the material looks a little bit wavy. That's a sign of thread tension issues. And same with if you sew and you look on the back side and there is a line of thread, it almost looks like a railroad tie where you'll see threads going over it. That's an issue possibly with thread tension as well. Thread tension issues mainly have to do with the thinness and thickness of fabric. So we're going to use two extremes when we're talking about this today. So in the class that I've taught, the basic sewing class, we always use this analogy, and I think it's really helpful. So imagine that on one side you have really thick layers of flannel or fleece. Let's use fleece. Thick layers of fleece. And on the other extreme, you have really thin, like wedding veil material. Okay, like tulle, very, very fine. So you can imagine that if you are working with multiple layers of fleece, you are going to need your thread to be less tense to get through all of those layers, right? Because otherwise, if you're working on something that's really thick and you're using tighter thread tension, what's going to happen is your material and your project is going to look pierced from the stitches that are going through, okay? So it's going to bunch in. You don't want that. Obviously, you don't want that kind of a look. So, so what you're going to do is you're going to lower the number on your thread tension dial. You're going to lessen your thread tension. Now, I think this is highly counterintuitive because if it's thicker, the number should be higher, right? No, totally not the case. And it took me a long time before I finally really got that. So, so you want to make sure that you're dialing down your thread tension to go through multiple layers of fleece. Okay, so conversely, if you're using the thin wedding veil material, you can imagine if you're using a standard thread tension, it's going to look super loose going through all of there and not look like a very secure stitch. And you're going to have flaws in it. It's going to look horrible. And so what you want to do is you want to tighten or go up in number with your thread tension. So those are like the most basic examples that I can give you in terms of using your thread tension dial. That said, with newer machines, the thread tension dial is awesome because it actually factors in a little wiggle room for you. So you don't have to do a huge amount of correction unless you're working with extremes. How cool is that, right? So the one thing though that can happen is you'll see those things and you'll think, oh my gosh, it's an issue with thread tension, and it may not be. So the other reasons that that you'll have issues with stitches or with your stitches that look like thread tension could be a couple of things. The first one is always have the right bobbin for your machine, because if you don't, it's going to look like thread tension issues. The other thing is you want to make sure that when you put your bobbin into your bobbin casing, whether it is a drop-in or a front load, you need to make sure your thread or your bobbin is going in the correct way. Because if it isn't, it's going to look like that railroad tie issue that we talked about earlier. So those are the two things that you need to make sure that you do. And the third, I preach it, but you've got to make sure your bobbin looks awesome, because if your bobbin looks like a total disaster before you put it into your bobbin casing, you are going to have a hideous stitch line, and there's just no way around that. So those are your troubleshooters for thread tension. And again, we just touched on it. I always say when you start out, don't work with things that stretch, because what I just taught you about thread tension changes considerably when you're working with knits. So keep that in mind. Flannels, cotton, quilting cotton, canvas, denim, those are all the type of materials that are going to ease you into working with thread tension as you're going forward. And then when you get really comfortable with that, start in with the knits. It's a perfect segue after that. All right, so set yourself up to succeed, and remember, as always, to follow our channel, subscribe to our newsletter. We always send out great tutorials and information. And of course, you can also follow us on social media with It's Just Sewing. And yeah, be fearless. We'll see you soon. Bye.